Welcome to Newton's Macabre Tales. To find more free short stories, visit www.newtonwebb.com with 2 B's. The Platinum Service by Newton Webb. Friday, March the 2nd, 2012. Initiation. Oliver sat at his new desk, looking at his email. The location was listed as being at the data center. The time was 5:30 in the evening. He texted his girlfriend to let her know he'd be late home. It was his first day at Dragon Insurance, and he wanted to make a good impression. What was limiting him so far was finding something to do. Frustrated, he leant over and spoke to the grey-haired man next to him. "Roger?" Bleary-eyed, Roger turned and looked at him with disdain. "What is it?" "Is there any work I could pick up? I've read all the documentation, and I'm up to date with all the terms, including Lloyd's Gross. Roger looked as though he'd swallowed something distasteful. "It's Friday." "Nobody works on a Friday. The Wolfpack hits it hard on a Thursday. If you want to be one of the boys, you'll learn to respect that. Just keep your head down and stay quiet." "Roger," Oliver persisted. "What?" Oliver pointed at his screen. "Where is the data center? We've a team meeting there tonight at 5:30. I need to let the missus know when I'll be back." "When you'll be back?" "Never. Give a time to your other half. Never. You're setting yourself up for failure. The data center is the code name for a strip club." Roger slurped his coffee, then tapped on the keyboard just enough to stop the screensaver from appearing. Grease from his morning bacon sandwich caused the keys to gleam. "We go to Diamond Girls. Most of the boys have girlfriends there. It's harmless fun. As it's your initiation, we'll probably end up at a brothel." Oliver blinked. I'm sorry, I have a girlfriend. I can't go to a brothel. She isn't going to be happy about the strip club either." "Are you simple? Why would you tell her? You absolute moron." Roger turned to face Oliver. "You have to go. It's mandatory team building. You won't last long here if you don't join the Wolfpack." £550 a day. A 6-month contract. That's 132,000 a year if they extend. "I'll be there," Oliver promised. "Too right." Roger resumed staring into space, as his hangover held his mind in impenetrable chains. "You'll know it's close to 5:30 when everyone turns off their location tracking, and Dave hides his kipar in his desk drawer," he murmured, looking vacant. "That is when the Wolfpack goes out on the hunt." "Right." Oliver began the exhausting process of looking busy, while simultaneously doing absolutely nothing. He'd previously done some programming work in the public sector, so he had perfected the art. It just sucked. Oliver had finished all the documentation, and was now reviewing the database line by line, drilling through it. It was painstaking and tedious. The code was a hodgepodge of different coding styles which slowed him down. Everyone had their own naming standard and way of doing things which led to some unusual design choices. "It's £550 a day. Suck it up." At 5:30, in perfect synchronicity, the boys locked their computers and began to circle Steve-O's desk. Oliver, looking at them, nervously stood and joined them. "Are we ready, lads, for another night on the prowl?" Steve-O smirked and leaned back in his chair. "First round's on the newbie." Dave reached up, removing his kipar and sliding it into his jacket pocket. The other men disabled the location tracking on their phones, so their wives would be none the wiser. "Last chance, Dickie!" Steve-O called over to one of the coders who was still at his desk. He looked up briefly and then shook his head. Roger leant in to whisper into Oliver's ear. "Dickie recently got in trouble with the missus. They only communicate via letters on the kitchen table. He shares them on the team signal group." "There's a team signal group?" Oliver muttered. "Yeah. Prove yourself tonight. They'll add you." Roger pointed with his thumb at Dickie. "Anyway, he has to have return home on time every night, or she'll leave him and take half his portfolio. He's worried sick that she'll leave him with the kids, So he has lunchtime appointments now. Bloody hell. Oliver shook his head. No wonder he needs therapy at lunch. The conversation stopped. Everyone looked at Oliver. Therapy? Steve-O looked as though he'd swallowed something foul. Fucking therapy? Like, tell me about your father? The rest of the team cackled. All I'd say to my therapist would be, my father was a fucking legend. Jesus, Oliver, you're so green. So, Oliver tried. Hookers. Dickie orders his hookers at lunchtime to save his marriage. I mean, it's a beta move, but she has him over a barrel. Roger confided. Bub, Steve-O ordered, and with that, the pack descended upon the closest pub, the Bull, for their first drink. And gathering around Steve-O, they supped their bottles of lager. Oliver had ordered a pint of ale. Rookie mistake. Roger pointed at the pint. You got to play the long time here. Bottles of lager slow down the drinking so you can last longer. You don't want to get to the data center and find yourself unable to unload, do you? Oliver raised his pint. I don't really drink lager. I'll just skip the next round. The hell you will. Nobody skips a round. Next, you'll try and order a softie. Roger slurped out of his bottle of Beck's. Next pub is all bar one. At this time of the day, it is rammed full of East European fanny. We buy them a bottle of Prosecco, chill out with them for a while, and then... Steve-O interrupted. Then we hit the data center! A chorus of cheers erupted from the wolf pack as they clinked their bottles together. Oliver grinned nervously. His phone chirped in his pocket and he reached for it. Don't you dare! Steve-O pointed his finger directly at Oliver's face. No bitches whilst the wolf pack hunts. 550 a day. Besides, it can't be that important a text. All bar one proved to be a bit of an anticlimax. After another 4 bottles of truly abhorrent lager, they watched as Dave alternated between sending bottles of Prosecco to tables of all the girls, and then calling them skanks when they refused to come over and join the wolf pack. When Oliver suggested he got a round in, Steve-O shook his head. Nah, enough of these bitches. It's time to get the real thing. A chorus of data center, data center, data center erupted. Bundling into the back of a black cab, the motley crew headed off to Earl's Court. As the cab bounced around, and they drove along beside the River Thames, the lads cackled in the back. I've already chosen mine. Jasmine, she has everything. A tiny waist, massive breasts, blonde hair. She's the real deal, Roger stated, holding up his phone with her profile and looking a touch smug. Steve-O smirked. Dealer's choice as always. Madame Gertz knows her pussy. She always finds me the best one for the night. Don't need to worry about the wife seeing my search history either. I think it's time, Dave said, nodding thoughtfully. Those whores at all bar one pissed me right off. Only the platinum service will do. A chorus of applause and high fives erupted. You madman! Steve-O shook his head in admiration. $2.5 grand? No fanny is that good, mate. Trust me. You can get top-notch action for 300 maximum, including anal. What can I say? We don't compromise in the wolf pack, Dave smirked. I'm due some top-quality tail. Oliver had been sitting quietly. I thought we were just going to a strip club or something. I really don't want to cheat on my girlfriend. What? Disgust lingered in the cab as the temperature lowered. I thought you wanted to be one of the wolf pack. We don't have beta males on our team. You need to think about what you just said and develop some fucking loyalty, Roger snapped. We're all married, but we still bond together. So what makes us an elite team? The taxi lurched as it drove over some hidden bump. As the group righted itself, Steve-O sneered. Sit this one out. We'll call this week probation. Next Thursday when we head to the data center, we'll do your initiation again. See if you can man the fuck up. Oliver sat uncomfortably as the others muttered around him. He was ordered to go round to the nearest pub and get a round of beers in, as well as post-buff sambucas. After the lads had disappeared, all hooting and howling about how they were going to perform. Oliver sat quietly. He nursed a bottle of Beck's and pulled out his phone. 5 missed calls and a text message from his girlfriend. I wanted to tell you in person, but it's late, and I'm going to bed. I went and got tested. I'm pregnant. We need to talk about this. Fuck! He typed back a message saying he'd be finished at the pub in about an hour, and then he'd head straight home. Sarah didn't reply. He hoped it was because she was asleep. About 25 minutes later, the boys started to filter in. Arms raised like football champions, they proclaimed their victory, and raising their shot, immediately downed it with a plume. After relating tall tales about their conquests, they waited patiently for Dave to return. They almost didn't notice him as he quietly walked in and sat down. He pushed his shot away. Roger looked round at the others. Dave, the shot is right there. I see it, Roger. I just don't want it. You what? I said I don't want it. I have just had the most amazing spiritual experience. It really put a lot of things into perspective for me. I don't want to ruin it with more alcohol. The others looked at him dumbfounded. In fact, I'm going to head home now. Thanks for a good night, lads. Thanks for a good night? Whatever happened in there? Steve-O looked horrified. I'm not allowed to say, but it was worth every penny. Dave smiled at them beneficently. He practically gleamed with self-assurance. He walked away from the table, leaving his beer and shot, to the Wolfpack's mute silence. What the fuck did they do to Dave? Roger looked as though he was going to be sick. Steve-O straightened his shoulders. Doesn't matter. He'll come to his senses. Once a member of the Wolfpack, always a member of the Wolfpack. New kid, you can do his shot. I'll have his beer. Oliver, aged 34 and older than Dave, ignored the reference to being a kid and sculled the shot. The beer was foul anyway. The sambuca burned as it went down. He listened quietly as the boys all discussed the Dave situation. After 30 minutes of disdain and theories about what the Platinum Service could be, Steve-O raised his hand. Right, I'm drinking myself sober. Dave's gone and ruined the night. Let's go. The Wolfpack emptied the drinks down their throats and lurched off in various different directions towards their home. Oliver staggered home to find his girlfriend asleep. He lumbered around the bedroom, drunkenly removing his clothes in a manner he hoped was stealthy, before she looked up at him. Oliver? What time is it? Go back to sleep, Sarah. We'll talk about it in the morning. Oliver walked over and stroked her hair. I'm so happy for us. Sarah smiled and slid back into sleep. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Oliver was still drunk as he pondered his options. If I just do 6 months at Dragon Insurance, we'll have enough money to move into a bigger flat. We could hit our ISA limit for once. Build a nest egg. He looked down at Sarah. She wouldn't understand if he told her he had to sleep with an escort for the job. Even he thought it sounded pathetic. He lay down on the bed. It was all about the child now. He would send out his CV for new contracts at a similar day rate. Ultimately, he had to do whatever was best for the three of them. In the morning, Oliver woke with a heavy hangover. Groaning, he stretched out onto the sheets. He could smell chipolatas frying downstairs, and his stomach gurgled. Sarah came up moments later. On a tray was black coffee. The acrid scent was ambrosia to him. 2 plates of baked sausages and tomatoes on sourdough toast joined it, and he eagerly sat up in bed to receive it. Can we talk? Sarah asked, as she joined him with her own plate. Oliver took his first sip of coffee and leaned back with appreciation. Absolutely. I was awake last night thinking about our baby. I'm I'm so excited for us. Awake? After the skinful you had? Sarah pulled a wry smile. Well, all right, not for long, but the pondering was intense, and it was very deep. Oliver slurped down another gulp of the black gold. Sarah bit off half a sausage. Chewing on it, she looked around the tiny studio flat. Can we even afford to have a child? Absolutely. Oliver looked her straight into her eyes. 100%. I don't really get on board with a particular brand of toxic masculinity at Dragon Insurance, but for £550 a day, we can get a nice 2-bed apartment and even start saving up a nest egg for our baby. If I get renewed, perhaps we could even think about buying a place. Laughing, Sarah jabbed him in the ribs, causing the coffee to almost spill over the white Egyptian cotton sheets. Buy a place? Come on, let's keep things realistic. Nobody can afford to buy in today's market. Seriously, the amount I'm getting? Hell, I might even get more when we renew. All I have to do is keep my head down and get along with the boys. He beamed earnestly at her. That's all, huh? I'm glad you feel that way. It's a huge step. Sarah snuggled in closer to him. Oliver put his arm around her. It's a massive step, but it's one that we'll take together. This is going to be good for us. Collecting the empty crockery, Sarah watched as Oliver slumped back into bed. Seriously? Going back to sleep after a coffee? $5.50 a day. My liver wrote the check, Oliver mumbled as he pulled the pillows tighter to his face. $5.50. Monday, March the 5th, 2012. On Monday, Oliver strolled into the office to find the wolf pack clustered around Dave's desk. He was loading his stuff into his briefcase. What do you mean? You haven't turned into Jesus, for Christ's sake? Steve-O was pacing. Look, don't make a rash decision. You're one of us. Many things clicked into place with me on Friday, mate. I woke up, and over breakfast, I told my wife everything. We were just honest with each other, for the first time. Dave smiled. It wasn't easy. We both cried. Oh, for fuck's sake, Roger muttered. But we stopped arguing. It feels like we're best friends again. All the drinking, all the women, that was just me externalizing that I was deeply unhappy with who I am. The Platinum service just brought all of this home to me. Dickie, I really think... Fuck off! I'm fine, thank you, you prick. Dickie sneered at Dave. I used to think you were all right. Now I see you for who you really are. A self-righteous piece of shit. I see you. Oliver sat down at his computer and avoided the confrontation, logging in to bring up his emails. His ears tracked the argument. As he reached the door, Dave turned to the team. Try the Platinum service, guys. You don't have to live like this. Steve-O leaned back in his chair. Go on then. Fuck off. Dave shrugged and left. Silence filled the office as everybody looked around at each other. Oliver tapped away at his computer, loading up his programming software and working through the first of his assigned bugs. The muttering next to him drew his attention. Never would have seen that coming. Dave was a legend. The Platinum service made him into a beta bitch. Roger was distraught. I won't use it. Got my usual whores. I never need anything fancy. My life is perfect. Oliver gave him a wan smile and returned awkwardly to his work. Someone had to do some coding. The others were all busy chatting and unleashing righteous indignation. Dave had been moved from the ranks of legend to traitor. It was unnerving to see them turn on their own so quickly after Friday's continuous pledges of loyalty and brotherhood. Steve-O rallied the troops in the evening and led them down to the Bull, where the conversation veered between continued rage at Dave and just how happy everyone was with their idyllic lives. Oliver got home at 9. The boys had steered clear of the data centre, so he was back in time to reheat his dinner and spend some quality time with Sarah, on the sofa, watching some TV. "Your breath is pure alcohol." Sarah wrinkled her nose as Oliver forked the contents of a chicken curry into his mouth. "How much of this $5.50 a day is being spent on drinks?" Oliver grinned. "It's tax deductible, business entertaining. It's expected when you're one of the boys." "You know, you always said you were a computer programmer, not a professional drinker." Puffing out his chest, Oliver looked at her straight. "When you're earning big bucks, you have to do the grime to get paid for your time." Sarah pulled a face and returned her attention to the TV. Oliver paid little attention. Finishing his curry, he leant back and declared they would have a shower and then turn in for an early night. Thursday, March the 8th, 2012. Oliver was back much later. Thursday was the new Friday in the city, and he stumbled home at 2 a.m. After the bull, and all bar one, the wolf pack had descended on Diamond Delights, a strip club. Sarah woke sharply as he slumped down next to her. "For fuck's sake, Ollie, I have to be up at 6 for work." She rolled towards him. "You reek of perfume. Where did you go?" The boys wanted to go, well, they wanted to go to a strip club," Oliver confessed. Sarah's eyes flickered open, and Oliver immediately regretted his honesty. "I've been making sandwiches for both of us, to save money, and you have frittered away our earnings on strippers? Your life isn't a non-stop bachelor party." She shook her head. "Ollie, you used to be so proud of your job." "Listen, it's 5..." He never got to finish. "If you say $5.50 a day again, I swear I will scream. How much of that $5.50 are you actually keeping? If you're down at the pub every night and then going to strip clubs, don't forget you have to pay tax." Oliver made the mistake of patting her shoulder. She flinched under his touch. "Listen, I make more than enough for a little bit of unwinding after work. This is where the real meetings happen. This is where we discuss what's happening in the office." "Bollocks." Sarah rolled over. Friday, March the 9th, 2012. In the morning, Oliver woke to find that Sarah had already left for work. She hadn't made him sandwiches for lunch. Not that it mattered. He'd been binning the sandwiches when he went to the office. The boys would go out for a pint and a pub lunch, or head to a proper sandwich joint. Oliver wasn't going to be scorned for having homemade sandwiches. "She won't need to be up at 6 every morning when we have a child. She can quit her job as a nurse. I'll be the breadwinner." Getting out of bed, he made himself a coffee with 2 spoons of sugar and 2 spoons of Nescafe. We should get a coffee machine like the Americans have on TV. He upended the carton of semi-skimmed milk over 3 Weetabix. Sitting in his underpants, he pondered on how he could fix his current dilemma. The way he saw it, Sarah had never understood money. She was a staunch saver and protective of their money, but she didn't understand that you had to invest if you wanted to make it into the big league. He'd already sketched out what he needed for a promotion in his mind's eye. Better suits were a must. He was still wearing his M&S interview suit and Clark's shoes. He needed to see a tailor, buy 3 suits, and buy a pair of Church's shoes. It would be a good idea to buy Steve-O an appointment, get him on side. Mentally, he was committed to hiring an escort to proving himself to the Wolfpack this evening. His initiation was going to be flawless this time. Oliver was determined to show that he could be an apex predator, like the rest of the boys. The office was quiet when he arrived. Only Roger was in before him. He was sitting hunched over his keyboard, working off his hangover on a bacon sandwich. His cheeks sagged unhealthily as he sipped a giant latte. The Telegraph online news was on his screen. He flicked through its articles. Oliver gave him a quick salute as he entered, getting a perfunctory nod from him in return. He started his PC and began the process of loading up. The first email was a calendar invite. Data center, at 5:30. With a grin, he clicked accept. With Sarah kicking off at home, he needed a good night out. A cluster of new bugs had been raised, and he skimmed through them for easy wins. Accepting the first, he was able to submit fixes for 2 of them, even before Steve-O marched in through the doors at 9. Scanning the bugs, Oliver looked for something challenging to keep him going through till lunch. There was an obscure rounding bug that Roger had tried to fix twice and failed. Oliver accepted it with a hungry grin and began poring through the code. Roger might be better at networking, but he did not have Oliver's analytical mind. Oliver tracked through the code, making notes and sketching out the data flow on a ring-bound A4 pad. Friday lunch was a pair of pints and a steak and ale pie at the Bull. They started talking through the pros and cons of various prospects for Oliver's first time at the data center. It seemed like the world was at Oliver's fingertips. When you earn this much money, you can have whatever you want. He shook his head as he looked at the different girls on offer in the online catalogue. Why did people bother desperately chatting up women in nightclubs? You can pick and choose here. Order champagne, and women come to you. His analytical mind, of which he was so proud, neglected to remind him of Dave's repeatedly failed attempts to lure girls over with champagne. The taste of ale and testosterone flowing through his system blanked out his higher functions, as they laughed at lewd jokes. At 52, and the oldest of the group, Roger was imparting his wisdom. The problem with women is that once they hit 25, they are essentially ruined. So it is important to have children early, because when they hit 30, you aren't going to want to go anywhere near that. Nodding, Steve-O raised his glass. My wife is 28. We have an arrangement. She doesn't bother me, I don't bother her. As long as she keeps herself tidy and doesn't embarrass me in public, we're all good. She knows she's easily replaceable if she lets herself go. Steve-O raised a finger in warning. The alternative is to end up like Dickie, where the wife is in control, so you have to get your release in lunchtime appointments. That's no way to live a life. Oliver didn't mention that Sarah was 32, and he found her immensely attractive. Nor did he say he loved her. Weak comments like that wouldn't do anything to further his position within the group. When he got back from lunch, he looked at the test scripts. He'd nailed it. The tests were all green, the rounding error was solved. Satisfied, he looked around for new bugs to pick up. He'd solved another 3 when the wolf pack started to gather, circling Steve-O's desk at 5:30. It was time for his initiation. This time, he knew what to expect, and he was in the right headspace. The boys drank their tiny bottles of Beck's, whilst making big statements about the problem with Britain today, and the idiocy of woke culture. Without Dave, the girls at all bar one went unhassled, as instead the wolf pack sat waiting for them to come to them. Sadly, as Steve-O noticed, the girls tonight were frigid, and none made the first move. They led Oliver to the data center. He didn't know why he had such grandiose expectations. In his imagination, he'd seen the data center as a Victorian mansion, with Madame Hertz clapping her hands together, and a series of elaborately dressed women dancing out in a line, waiting to be chosen. The reality was far more practical. After advice from the considerably more experienced Wolfpack, Oliver had reviewed the catalogue, and had instead decided to leave the decision to Madame Hertz. The building was very modern, resembling a hotel. Madame Hertz was a middle-aged woman dressed in a severe dark grey suit, sitting at a desk in the entrance lobby. A short-cut black bob framed a severe face. Her name badge didn't even say Madame Hertz. It said the considerably less exotic Mrs. Hertz. Stifling his disappointment, He was led to the woman by Steve-O. "Mrs. Ertz, my friend Oliver needs someone experienced, blonde, with good tats, but slim, not a Tonka truck." Slipping a well-practiced taut smile over her inscrutable face, Mrs. Hertz pulled a key from a pegboard. "I believe Candy will fit the bill. She knows how to handle a gentleman new to the more professional arts." Handing over a card machine, she keyed in £300. As Oliver hesitated, she assured him, "It will show up on your statement as PG Holdings." Quiet amusement briefly flickered as she noticed the expression of relief on his face. He took the key that she held out to him. The others picked up theirs as they paid their due. Ascending the stairs, the building was clean, but everything looked cheap. The carpet was plain and thin, the walls painted an off-white colour. The boys filtered off until Oliver was left outside room 31, grasping his key. Buoyed up with overpriced lager, he took a deep breath and inserted it. He wasn't cheating on Sarah. This was just team building. He opened the door and found himself face to face with a buxom blonde with heavily made-up eyes. She was checking her phone. "Standard service today, I see. No extras?" She patted the cheap nylon quilt on which she was sitting and looked up at Oliver, saying briskly, "Take off your clothes, love. You can hang 'em on the chair." The room was an unimpressive cell with a narrow single bed. A small table held the basics: condoms, tissues, and a bottle of lubricant with a pump dispenser. A simple chair stood at the end of the bed. Nervously, Oliver unbuttoned his shirt. Apart from an awkward moment, hopping around with trousers that refused to come off, he managed to remove his clothes and hang them on the chair whilst Candy continued to tap on her phone. "All done?" She smiled and motioned again for him to join her. He moved down to the bed and went to kiss her. No kissing, you naughty boy." "Sorry," Oliver said, embarrassed. He sat there, unsure of how to proceed. Reaching over to the table, Candy picked up a condom and opened up the wrapper. "Why don't you lean back whilst I pop this on, eh?" Oliver gratefully obeyed. She slid the latex-free condom over his erect member, whilst he lay there. Nervously, he twiddled his feet until the task was complete. She clambered on top of him and slid down onto his shaft. After that, the rest was more manageable. 20 minutes later, fully dressed, Oliver was in the local pub waiting for the boys to assemble. Steve-O was first in. So had the circle of after-spuff sambucas waiting. Steve-O's was obviously empty, face down at the table. When Oliver picked up his shot, he was greeted with a roar of primal triumph. He'd passed the test and was one of the wolf pack. As the boys filtered in, all crowing their victories, they all wanted the details. Oliver glossed over the awkwardness, the clinical simplicity of the act. Instead, he went with an understated description of the event, masquerading his discomfort as being gentlemanly. Regardless of his laconic recital, the boys lapped it up and cheered at the appropriate moments. When he got home, Sarah was asleep, or pretending to be. He showered, then climbed in next to her, wrapping his arm around her stomach. Saturday, March the 10th, 2012. Oliver lay in bed with a hangover, while Sarah slid out, made herself some breakfast, and went out for a jog. He could tell she was annoyed at him for coming home drunk last night, and decided eventually to confront her about it over lunch. "No," she said, her eyes as steel. "I don't care that you came home drunk on a Friday night. I'm not the fun police. I care that you have come home drunk every night." Oliver shrugged. "Look, team building is—" "So you say. Repeatedly. I'm surprised you haven't mentioned the $5.50 a day yet. You should tattoo it on your forehead. I don't think you understand just how much money that really is." Oliver pushed his fork at the desultory salad in front of him. Quinoa salad and cheese and tomato quiche weren't going to cut it today. He was going to need to order a McDonald's from Uber Eats. I'm not an idiot. I understand how important it is to have money when raising a child, but at the moment, I have an absentee boyfriend, and I absolutely will not allow my child to have an absentee father. Sarah stabbed her fork into her quiche, savagely spearing a segment. Oliver leaned back. Your child? Don't you mean our child? How can it be our child? You're never here, Sarah said coldly. Oliver put down his fork. I'm going out. Oh, of course you are. Good to see that you chose avoidance as your primary coping mechanism. Very healthy. Sarah tore the quiche off the fork and glared daggers at Oliver. Why the hell would I want to stay here with this? Muttering a half-hearted whatever, Oliver marched out the front door into the drizzle. Slate-grey clouds shielded him from the sun's glare. It could do nothing about the harpy behind him. The rest of the weekend passed slowly. It was like being trapped in the house with a velociraptor. Oliver began to rethink the whole parenthood angle. All he wanted to do was return to the office. A lifetime with Sarah was not looking appealing at all. Monday, March the 12th, 2012. Oliver arrived at the office early, beating even Roger. He sat down at his desk munching a bacon and egg sandwich. He grimly noted earlier that his previously lean torso was filling out after all the beers. Oliver eyed the bacon and egg sandwich critically. This won't help. It was needed, though. After a weekend of the cold shoulder, he needed some warmth in his life. Roger settled down next to him. You're in early? Girlfriend kicking off, Oliver grumbled. He started looking for bugs to squash. At least in the office, he felt valued. You need to nip that in the bud. She has to understand who's in charge, Roger advised. If you don't, she'll only keep on whining. It is deeply ingrained into the female nature to try and supplant the patriarchy if they sense weakness. Oliver nodded politely, though privately he suspected that Roger didn't know what he was talking about. We're fine. She just doesn't like that I'm out all the time. Of course she doesn't. Women want to keep an eye on their men so they can be in control. You need a clear delineation. The home is her territory, the office is yours. Roger pulled out his bacon sandwich. Grease dribbled down his hands. Does she have a job? She's a nurse, Oliver admitted after pausing to chew. Roger had no such compunctions and spoke through his sandwich. That's your problem then. She thinks she's your equal because she's got a job, even though I doubt it pays nearly as much. Darkly, Oliver reflected that maybe when the child was born and Sarah became wholly dependent on his income, she might simmer down. Then he immediately regretted the thought. He loved Sarah, he really did, and didn't want a servant. He wanted a best friend. Oliver thought of Dave and came to a solution. He pinged out a calendar invite. Data center at 5:30. Fuck me, Oliver, Roger grinned. On a Monday? Yes, you're one of us now, an apex predator. Who are you going for? Anyone in mind? Leaning back, Oliver smiled. I do. In fact, I'm going for the Platinum Service. The boys clustered around Madame Hertz, received their keycards, and headed to their allocated rooms. Oliver took a deep breath as he prepared himself to spend £2,500. He smiled nervously at Madame Hertz. I think I'm ready. I would like the Platinum Service, please. Mrs. Hertz's face grew serious. Of course. A few terms and conditions first. The Platinum Service is our premium product. It will bring you to new heights of pleasure and relaxation. However, we have a strict rule that each customer may only use it once, so we will need to take a copy of your ID for our records." Oliver listened intently as she continued to lay out the terms and conditions. "Furthermore, we require a gentleman's agreement never to discuss what happens in that room with anyone else." Programming the card machine, Mrs. Hertz slid it across the desk. Why do you need my ID? I don't want to give my ID to a place like... Well, I'm a very private man," Oliver blathered. "Unfortunately, the Platinum Service is a victim of its own success. Its sheer potency can grow addictive. We have the one-time rule to protect our valued clients from themselves." Mrs. Hertz tapped the card machine. Oliver hesitated. "It isn't drugs, is it?" "We cannot discuss the Platinum Service in any way other than its cost, which is £2,500. It is worth every penny, or else we wouldn't need the one-time rule." "Oh, it's definitely drugs. Oh, God, I hope it's not meth." He thought of the baby. He thought of Sarah. If this brings me clarity like Dave, it's worth it. At less than 5 days' pay, it had to be worth it. He handed over his driver's license and paid the money. Mrs. Hertz picked up the phone and dialed up an assistant to escort him upstairs to the top floor. Nervous energy competed with excitement at the prospect of this ultimate treat. The assistant, a long-haired brunette with a black lacy dress, gave him a coquettish smile. Her lip gloss gleamed in the soft downlights. Taking him by the hand, she led him up the stairs. Oliver eyed her up and down with heightened anticipation. Is she the Platinum Service? At the top of the stairs was just one short corridor with 2 doors. One marked Maintenance, no entry. The other was locked. The assistant pulled out a key with a flourish and unlocked the door. Opening it, she gestured for him to go through. The corridor continued a short way until it reached a pair of curtains. Behind him, he heard the door click and lock shut. Oliver sped up, his blood almost feverish as he felt himself growing engorged with excitement. Flicking the curtains to one side, he stormed through. What the fuck? The room was relatively spacious. In one corner was a large leather armchair. A small table stood next to it, bearing a bottle of cucumber water and a crystal glass. The sound of ocean waves played in the background. His eyes, however, were fixed on the room's centerpiece. On the far side was a hole, surrounded by padded faux leather, and with 2 roll bars on either side for gaining purchase. Oliver had paid £2,500, almost 5 days' pay, for a fucking glory hole. After staring at it in mute disbelief, acceptance finally kicked in, and he stormed back to find the door locked. He pounded on it and shouted, demanding to be let out and refunded. When that failed, he walked up to the hole and peered through. Nothing but jet-black darkness awaited him. He shouted through it, asking to speak to Mrs. Hertz. Nothing. No movement, no sound. He paced up and down the room, infuriated. He looked at the cucumber water. He looked at the hole. Shaking his head, he made a decision. Unzipping his flies, he approached the hole. Here goes nothing. The assistant came for him an hour later. He vaguely heard the click of the lock as he sat in a daze sipping at the cucumber water. His entire body felt relaxed, as though he'd just come out of a long massage. Mutely, he watched her approach. He was deep in his own thoughts, but all good things must come to an end. He stood up slowly. His legs felt like jelly, but grew in strength as he followed the assistant to the door. "Did you have a good time?" she asked quietly, her smile knowing. That was quite the experience. It wasn't at all what I expected," Oliver said. The world carried a residual sense of stillness to it. Sounds felt muted. Colours felt brighter, more discordant. He passed Mrs. Hertz to step outside into the chill of the evening air. He could see the pub in the distance. The wolf pack was waiting for him, but he just wanted to get home to Sarah. He dropped them a text. "I'm knackered. Heading home, boys. See you Tuesday." Hailing a taxi, he climbed in to avoid the tube. He felt a pressing need to get straight back to his flat, to Sarah. Closing his eyes, he thought about what he really wanted out of life, and how he could achieve it. The wolf pack had been a distraction, an attempt to fit in. It was unwarranted. Over half of the team's bugs were solved by him, and by him alone. He was more important to them than they were to him. The jewelled lights of London flitted by as his taxi rumbled along the roads. He looked out at the boats on the River Thames as this plan started to formulate in his mind. If he played this right, he could achieve every single one of his goals. In the background, the radio was playing some kind of smooth jazz. The cloying scent of 3 Christmas tree air fresheners permeated the air in the car as he sat back, holding the support on the side. He hadn't spared any time for Sarah. Worse, he'd neglected to consider that being a nurse, she worked equally hard, and that she also needed some time to unwind. "I've been a prick." When the taxi stopped outside the house, he gave the driver his fee and a £10 note as a tip. Opening the front door, he headed straight to the kitchen. Making up a pair of hot chocolates, he sprinkled some dark chocolate flakes over the top and carried them upstairs. Seeing Sarah lying in bed, the lights off, he placed down his mug. "Hey, Sarah. I know you're awake. I brought you a hot chocolate. I really need to apologise to you." Oliver held out her mug. Rolling over and rubbing the sleep out of her eyes, Sarah regarded him critically. She shuffled up to a seated position and accepted the peace offering. "I had a therapeutic session today, and it put many things into perspective." He smiled at her, feeling peaceful. "I was able to take a step back and see things from your position for maybe the first time since I took on this contract. And I want to apologise for my behaviour." Oliver sat down on the bed next to her and took his mug. The thick, dark chocolate was still too hot to drink, so he blew on it gently. "I found the culture, the money, it was all a bit overwhelming. I haven't experienced anything like that before, and it was like I'd joined a different way of life." He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "What I didn't realise was that the lifestyle didn't represent me, nor did I see how the toxic behaviour of others at the office was changing me and affecting my home life." Sarah viewed him thoughtfully. Change can be difficult, especially when you face change at home and work simultaneously. "I'll be back earlier on Tuesday. The hours are still long, but if they want me to be involved in meetings, they can do them in the office." Oliver leaned back against the headboard, his head cooled by the solid pine. "How about we order a pizza and watch something on Netflix? Spend a night in, just you and I." "Sounds good. It's Oh, it's been a long time, Sarah said. She snuggled in closer to the warmth of his body as they sipped their hot chocolates in silence. Placing the empty mugs on the bedside table, they moved in closer and kissed gently. Hands wandered, and they made love slowly, sensually. As Oliver looked into Sarah's eyes, all he could think of was that padded hole in the wall. Every time he tried to focus on her, his attention wandered until his eyes closed. He visualized himself thrusting into that faux leather orifice. When they'd finished and rolled apart, sweaty and tired, she looked at him with a curious expression. He was worried that she would confront him about it. Instead, she got up, went to the toilet, and they both faded into sleep. Monday, March the 19th, 2012. Oliver arrived early again on Monday. The weekend had been relaxing. They'd gone for a long walk in Richmond Park on Saturday, then for a roast dinner on Sunday for the first time in a month. They'd spent quality time together. Loading up the bugs, he chose himself a couple of easy ones to start the day with. Steve-O had sent a project over for him to take on, rewriting the bordereau reports for their new reinsurer. Oliver smiled. Proper work for once, not just crushing bugs. Roger walked up behind him. The bordereau reports are mine. I always work on them. Sorry, Roger. A rounding bug has cropped up in the specialty reports. You can look at that instead. Steve-O has assigned the reports to me. Oliver typed on, growing aware of the ever-increasing silence from Roger. Finally, he turned, feeling eyes burning through the back of his skull, to see Roger staring at him malevolently. I see you. Roger pointed his finger level with Oliver's face. Oliver eyed him coolly. I'm not interested in arguing, Roger. I've no personal problems with you. Let's just focus on getting our work done. You're a snake. Roger took a seat next to him, opening up his bacon sandwich. Those are my reports. I earned that project. I'm loyal. You should have heard what everyone said when you ditched the team on Monday. He took a deep bite before mumbling through a mouthful of grease, bread, and meat. They don't trust you. They trust me to get my work done ahead of schedule, for it to be low in bugs, and to lead to an improvement in the surrounding codebase. Oliver shrugged. Ultimately, that is more important than how long I stay down the pub, or how many drinks I have. Roger's lip curled. That platinum service is toxic. It ruins everyone it touches. You had potential, kid. Uh-huh. Oliver focused on his screen. The existing codebase for the bordereau reports was a mess. He'd need to recode it all to bring it up to standard. Monday night, Oliver got home first before Sarah. He set up a few candles around the sofa and ordered their favourite pizza and a tub of ice cream from Papa John's. He was flicking through the programs on Netflix, looking for a potential movie when Sarah got home. The warmth from the weekend had vanished. Sarah was brandishing her phone like a weapon. What the hell is PG Holdings? Because it sure isn't teabags at £2,500 and £1,000. Oliver's heart skipped a beat. It's a one-time intensive therapy. It's what helped me so much on Friday. I really needed it. I think we really needed it. We? Sarah walked over to the sofa. Oliver, you keep telling me how rich we are and how I don't understand money, so perhaps you could explain simply why we have no money in our current account and we're in debt on our credit card. Think of it as an investment. I needed a realignment to set myself straight. I'm not going down the pub anymore. It was a one-time therapy. They actually don't let you have more than one session. Oliver looked at her serenely, gently patting the sofa next to him. Looking down, she raised an eyebrow. I'm not a dog, Ollie. I know, he smiled at her. Listen, I know you're making changes, but we can't be in debt when the baby comes along. I only get so much maternity leave. Things are going to be tight, Sarah said, her eyes worried. Just keep an eye on your banking app. Watch the money flood in each week, and those numbers rocket. Look, I understand why you're concerned, but it was just some teething issues. It's to be expected. Sarah sat down dubiously. Well, are there any more teething issues for me to be aware of? Because I'm not feeling very secure right now. Everything's fine, Sarah. It's all going to be okay. Oliver stroked her hair. I'm going to take care of us both. They sat back on the sofa and watched Cruel Intentions. When the pizza and ice cream arrived, they ate contentedly and reached a quiet acceptance, if not quite yet an understanding. Later that night, they made love again. Once again, Oliver's mind was filled with memories of the padded hole in the wall. Saturday, March the 25th, 2012. It was evening. The streets were getting busy as groups of marauding revellers began to search for pubs and bars to start their night. Oliver had no such compunction. He was standing outside the data centre. The Platinum Service had loomed in his mind all week. The concept of a glory hole had always repulsed him. Yet now the memory of its warm, mysterious touch obsessed him. He wondered what the woman on the other side looked like. He visualized a young blonde. He could almost see a red cocktail dress. He'd thought about it and nothing else at work. His work had started to degrade. More bugs were being raised against it. His speed was slowing down. Oliver decided that he needed one more session of the Platinum Service, just to get it out of his system. He'd need a new credit card, otherwise Sarah would be worried. He'd also need a new form of ID. He picked up his phone and texted his brother, asking if he could take him to lunch at the weekend. The next problem was Madame Hertz. She'd recognize him. Looking at the opening hours of the data center, he saw that it was open 7 days a week. He was willing to guess that she wasn't working every day. He decided to try at the weekend and see if they had someone else at the front desk. That time was now. In one hand, Oliver had a new credit card, so that Sarah wouldn't be able to check up on him. In the other, he had his brother Ralph's driving license. They looked similar, even though Ralph was 2 years younger than him. It had taken lunch at Belgo's to persuade him. Oliver had lied and told him it was for a prank in the office. After a few steins of Flemish beer, his brother had agreed and handed it over. Looking through the door, he saw that his supposition that they would have a different madame on duty at the weekend had been correct. A severe-looking blonde sat at the counter, her hair pulled back into a ponytail, and her eyes framed by a pair of thin spectacles. As he approached, she looked up. "Welcome. How may I be of assistance to you today?" "I'd like to try the Platinum Service, please." Eyeing him, she judged him quietly, and then curtly run through the cost, the secrecy policy, and the stipulation that you could only use the service once. Oliver nodded rapidly. He was fully erect already. His breathing was shallow in anticipation. It took all of his willpower not to run to the room. Instead, he was meekly led there by an assistant called Jessica. As the door clicked behind him, he wasted no time, unzipping his flies and pulling down his briefs. He grabbed the roll bars on each side of the hole and began rapidly thrusting. He could hear gagging sounds on the other side and grinned. An animalistic expression of primal lust distorted his face. An hour later, he was found reclining on the chair by the assistant, who gently led him out of the room. Sunday, March the 26th, 2012. Oliver hadn't slept that night. Thoughts of the Platinum Service dominated his mind. He tried everything. Hot chocolate, showers, even sneaking to the bathroom to relieve himself. That hole just echoed in his visions. He wanted it more. He needed it. After a sleepless night, Sarah got out of bed at 6 o'clock. He'd listened to her sleeping most of the night next to him. Right, I'm making us tea. Then you can tell me what kept you up all night. Oliver lay in bed, exhausted. How do I explain this? When Sarah returned 20 minutes later, she had bacon sandwiches with her. Thought you might be hungry. She popped his cup of tea next to him, and his breakfast. He looked at it forlornly. His appetite for food, for drink, was non-existent. All he wanted to do was to return to the data center. Now then, what's on your mind? Sarah looked at him kindly. I've been having a lot of stress at work. I'm working on these reports. It's tough. Oliver tried. He couldn't tell if Sarah believed him or not, but she nodded sympathetically. Patting him on the shoulder, she asked him what she could do to help. Oliver looked her in the eyes. Then his vision dropped to her mouth, and his body reacted. Reaching for her hand, he guided it into place. When she began to work his shaft, he slid his hand round to the back of her head and pushed it slowly down. All right. Head pushing, is it now? She grumbled, but acquiesced. As her head moved into position, and the anticipation sent him into a whirl of excitement, she suddenly snapped her head back. What's this? She asked. Pulling back the sheets, she reached back, got her phone, and switched on its torch function. What's what? Oliver looked down in panic. Then he saw it, eyes widening with alarm. A handful of black soot-like spots were showing on his erect member. The veins around it looked dark and swollen. Sarah took a photo. Don't do that! Delete it! Oliver said, horrified. I've never seen anything like this before. It looks like a sexually transmitted infection, but it's like nothing I've seen before. She moved back to lie down next to him. Have you been cheating on me? Oliver blinked. The question was cold, matter-of-fact, and clinical. No, I would never. If it wasn't for sudden onset and the veins, I'd say it was penile melanoma. When did you start to get these symptoms? Sarah asked, immediately in work mode. I didn't. I don't know. You're the first person to spot them. She reached up to his forehead. I need to get my thermometer. Feels like a temperature, but it could just be because you've been under the duvet. Oliver sat up. He felt shell-shocked. All he could think was, the Platinum Service did this. He closed his eyes. Even though he knew the cause, he couldn't help but want to use it again. Sarah disappeared and returned with her infrared thermometer, shining it on his forehead. She nodded grimly. Yep, you have a temperature. We need to book you in with the doctor, as soon as it opens at 9. She looked at him coolly. You sure this isn't an STI? It's very sudden. Do you promise to me that you haven't been cheating? Oliver looked straight back into her eyes and lied. I would never, ever cheat on you. Sarah returned with some aspirin for his fever. He gratefully swallowed them down with a mouthful of tea. His sense of taste had gone, leaving the drink lifeless and drab. The data center opened at 3 o'clock. He would return and give them a piece of his mind. "You should try and get some of that bacon sandwich down you," Sarah tried. Oliver shook his head. He had no interest in food or drink. He knew what he wanted. He knew what he needed. Oliver walked the streets. Sarah had managed to get him a doctor's appointment. They prescribed him antibiotics and had taken a battery of blood tests. No definitive diagnosis yet. He felt worse. He was alternating between freezing cold and boiling hot. His jaw was aching, and his throat felt dry even when he drank water. He found himself sitting outside the data center, waiting for it to open. As he shivered, he saw Madame Hertz walking towards the front door. "Mrs. Hertz?" He called towards her. She stopped and regarded him critically. "Let me open up. We can talk in about 30 minutes, she said professionally. The door opened. Oliver stopped pacing and went inside. "May I help you, sir?" Madame Hertz had the same look on her face that she always did. Quiet, professional, calm. "The Platinum Service gave me a disease. I want a refund," Oliver demanded. Mrs. Hertz looked concerned. She asked for his name. Checking her record, she tutted. "As I thought, you had a Platinum Service over a week ago." She looked up at him. She eyed him critically. "What are your symptoms? When did you first notice them?" "Actually, I didn't. I last used the Platinum Service yesterday under the name of Ralph Kinley." Mrs. Hertz froze. "You falsified your data!" She shook her head. "The Platinum Service is only to be allowed once per customer. We were very clear. It is to be used in moderation. Only." "Oh, please. That's just marketing," Oliver ranted. "How often do you clean that hole?" Hissing, Mrs. Hertz motioned for the security guard to return to his post. "Never, ever reveal the secret of the Platinum Service. Yeah? Well, right now, I am considering tweeting not only what it is, but also the fact that I caught a fucking disease from your skanky hole." Oliver's voice sounded strained. His throat felt so dry. "Mr. Kinley, we rigorously test all of our performers and keep our facilities spotless. I can see that you're upset. Allow me to offer you a complimentary session of the Platinum Service. Tiffany can take you there right now." Oliver gazed levelly at her. "This is an addiction. Addiction is a social construct. You're just making use of a free £2,500 worth of entertainment. This is making me ill. You're on medication now. You'll be better in no time. Besides, it's probably nothing to do with the Platinum Service. You aren't a doctor. How would you know?" "Okay," he rasped. Relief and disappointment washed over him in equal measure. Tiffany took him by the hand and led him upstairs. Monday, March the 27th, 2012. When Sarah woke on Monday, she found Oliver shaking. He still wasn't eating. The darkened veins had turned black and were spreading up his torso. His jaw hung slack. He could barely speak. His head wobbled on his shoulders as the muscles weakened. She immediately dialed for an ambulance, looking at him with concern. She helped him down the stairs and into the ambulance. Wiping a bit of drool from his face with a tissue, Sarah sat in the back with him and held his hand. Oliver was lifted into a chair and wheeled through the doors of A&E. He groaned and shivered. Adjusting the blanket, Sarah looked at him worried. "I'm sorry, Ollie. I have to get to work. I'll come back and see you straight afterwards." He mumbled something, but it wasn't clear. Sarah patted his head and left him to begin her shift. The ambulance had taken him to St. George's Hospital, not the hospital that she worked at, which was the Chelsea in Westminster. Gathering her things, she clutched his hand, giving him one last worried look. Oliver lay in bed until a need to go to the loo forced him to rise. He staggered to the bathroom and released a stream of urine into the toilet, clutching onto the roll bar. Looking at his phone, he loaded up Uber and ordered a cab. Staggering to the front entrance, he collapsed into the taxi, expending his last strength. The taxi driver looked horrified as he drove him to his predetermined destination, the data center. When he arrived, his legs had completely given up. He tried to explain to the taxi driver that he needed help, but his voice wouldn't work. His jaw had lost all muscular control now and just hung slack. "Fucking junkies!" The taxi driver swore at him. Looking around, he swore again before getting out and dragging Oliver to the pavement outside the data center. "Someone else's problem now?" As the Uber raced off, no doubt after leaving him a 1-star review, the data center doors opened. Madame Hertz took one look at the problem and directed the security guard to carry Oliver like a swaddling babe. "Don't you worry, sir. We'll take care of you." He was carried to the top floor. Even in his condition, Oliver grew excited when he saw the entrance to the Platinum service. But they didn't go through that door. Instead, Mrs. Hertz led him to the door marked Maintenance, No Entry. Unlocking it and holding it open for the security guard, she beckoned them on. Oliver's eyes widened in horror while he was carried around the bend in the long corridor. He couldn't. His voice was ruined. He couldn't cry out. He couldn't scream. Behind the hole for the Platinum service, a grey-haired man in a suit had his head strapped to the wall. An IV drip was attached to his wrists. Mrs. Hertz undid the leather restraints, and the man collapsed to the ground. Grunting with the effort, she dragged the body to one side as the security guard placed Oliver down in the position the old man had previously occupied. He felt rough hands strap his head against the wall. An IV drip was attached to his wrist. A catheter was inserted into his penis. Tears rolled down his face as he knelt there for however long. He didn't see what they did with the previous occupant. After a while, he heard the sounds of someone walking in. "What is this shit?" He heard them complain as they paced the room behind the wall. Minutes later, Oliver heard them unzip. He wanted to shout, to scream, but his throat was no longer capable of speech. Moments later, his throat had other duties to perform, as a thick, girthy member was forced into it. His eyes wept unabated as his first client received the Platinum service. Thank you for listening. To get notified every time a new episode is released, please click follow or subscribe and turn on all notifications. If you enjoyed this episode, then please take a moment to rate Newton's Macabre Tales. Reviewing allows the podcast to grow.